Guys, one of my biggest beefs with progressives is the fact that they live in cuckoo for Cocoa Puff world. They live in la la land. They live in a fantasy world where everything is unicorn and rainbows. Okay, that's the world they live in. Okay, where violent criminals aren't actually violent. Okay, where riots are actually peaceful protests. This is the type of world they live in. And this is why I will never, ever, ever give my money to progressive causes, right? I just can't do it. I just can't do it, right? Because they are terrible with money. They're terrible with money, right? And a great example of this is this Minnesota Freedom Fund, which was supported by Vice President Kamala Harris, right? The Minnesota Freedom Fund is a fund that people donated to after the whole George Floyd thing, right? And this fund decided that, hey, we're going to bail out the peaceful rioters and protesters, okay, that were destroying black businesses, destroying cities, destroying neighborhoods, ruining people's lives. We're going to bail those people out, right? We're going to bail out people with violent tendencies. But it looks like they took bailing out people with violent tendencies to the extreme, as somebody that they've bailed out is now been charged with murder. Now, keep in mind, Kamala Harris supported this fund. She supported it. So in my opinion, it sounds to me like she may have blood on her hands. I'm just saying. So how do we get to this point? Well, guys, a local news station, Fox 9 out of Minnesota, actually did a excellent investigative report on this Minnesota Freedom Fund and the people that they were bailing out. And I want you guys to take a look at that before going into the details about what happened with this specific case. Take a look.
New questions about who the Minnesota Freedom Fund is bailing out and whether it's making the system more fair or the streets less safe. Here's Tom Lydon of the Fox 9 investigators.
It may just be the closest thing to a get-out-of-jail-free card. Jaleel Stallings, charged with attempted murder, prosecutors say he shot at a SWAT team during the riots in May. Someone paid $75,000 cash to get him out of jail. Darnica Floyd, charged with second-degree murder for stabbing a friend to death. $100,000 cash, and she got out of jail too. There's Christopher Boswell, a twice-convicted rapist, currently charged with kidnapping and sexual assault in 2 separate cases. $350,000, all cash, and he walks out too. All 3 would probably still be sitting in jail if it wasn't for the Minnesota Freedom Fund, the group that paid their bail, no questions asked.
Last time I was down there, said, we hate it when you bail out these sex offenders, was exactly what they said.
Greg Lewin is the group's executive director, who says it's not about the crime, it's about the system. In Minnesota, 60% of the jail population is just waiting for trial, innocent till proven guilty, with black people incarcerated in Minnesota jails at nearly 5 times the rate of whites. Native Americans, 11 times. It's one of the largest disparities in the U.S.
I often don't even look at a charge specifics when I bail someone out. I'll see it after I pay the bail because it's not the point. It's just that it is not the point. The point is the system that we're fighting.
And now the Freedom Fund has a whole lot more money for that fight. Prior tax returns show in a good year they pull in about $100,000 in donations. But after the police killing of George Floyd and supportive tweets from Hollywood celebrities, they've now received more than $35 million in contributions.
We initially got many raised eyebrows, especially when we ramped up our activity from paying $1,000 a day across however many cases we could to now closer to up to $100,000 a day. Some very raised eyebrows from our bankers.
Not just bankers, but others who wondered where all the money was going and who was accountable. Most of the protesters arrested were quickly released or only received citations.
So how many of the protesters do you think you helped?
The answer is probably closer to a dozen in terms of direct bail actions.
Before the killing of George Floyd, Freedom Fund bailed out 563 people with an average bail of $342. Since Floyd, the fund has bailed out 184 people, but the average bail is much, much higher, $13,000. Freedom Fund is also assisting 400 people with what they call pretrial justice, court fines, legal fees, even lost wages. About 83% of those bailed out, the group says, have been Black, Indigenous, or people of color.
A lot of people, are saying F the police right now. Those same people, quite frankly, and that tendency should be thinking F the courts and F the jails as well, because that is part of the same cycle.
There has to be some scrutiny on this.
Jeff Clayton is the executive director of the American Bail Coalition.
Have you noticed a recent pattern in who they're bailing out?
Well, it's got to be violent criminals because that's all that's left. There's nobody left. There's no peaceful protesters for them to spend this kind of money on.
The Bail Coalition recently wrote a letter to the Hennepin County Sheriff, threatening to sue if it didn't release the names of inmates bailed out by Freedom Fund.
A judge or a prosecutor should know if it's Vladimir Putin's henchmen posting the bond for this guy, or if it's a co-conspirator, or if it's part of organized crime to bail the person out.
The bail bond industry is highly regulated, but come to find out, when a third party like Minnesota Freedom Fund comes here to the jail and pays all cash to get someone out, there is no public record of that transaction. There is no transparency. We were surprised too. The only way the Fox 9 investigators found out about these Minnesota Freedom Fund cases was to dig deep into the individual court records to find a notation that Freedom Fund was paying for the bail. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. And who else is going to do that work?
Yo, shout out to Fox 9. Y'all some real ones. Y'all some real ones, okay? Because that video I just showed you guys came out in the beginning of August last year, right? And that was before this had happened, right? This guy that we're going to talk about, George Howard, who's basically been accused of murder, charged with murder. That was before that incident. But it was right around the time that they had let this dude out. Now, guys, did you listen to the guy from the Minnesota Freedom Fund? How he basically said, well, it's not about the crime, it's about the system. They didn't have that many protesters to bail out, and they were sitting on $30-some million. It was like, hey, you know what? We got all this money. Let's just start bailing all the criminals out, right? We don't care what they do. We don't care what crimes they've been committed of. We don't care about any of that, right? We're just going to bail them out. And that's literally what they did. Guys, that is progressive criminal justice, right? That is progressive criminal justice. I am a law and order type of guy, okay? I'm law and order, right? I know what progressive criminal justice looks like. That's what it looks like, and that's why I'm law and order, right? I want to lock up the violent criminals. Now, non-violent criminals, look, I'm a little bit more lenient on those people, right? Drug offenders, people that get locked up for doing stuff, again, that's non-violent. I have a soft spot for those people because I think it's ridiculous to put those people in cages, right? For the state to do that. But I don't think it's ridiculous for the state to put people in cages that have shown violent tendencies, right? Who knows? I mean, again, I am just some random dude on the internet. What do I know, right? What do I know? So let's read a little bit more about this George Howard case. A bail fund, once backed by Vice President Kamala Harris, helped free an alleged domestic abuser who is now accused of murder. George Howard, 48, allegedly became involved in a road rage altercation on an Interstate 94 entrance ramp before he shot another driver, according to Minneapolis police, weeks after bailing out on domestic assault charges. Surveillance video recorded the moments when the driver of a blue BMW confronted Howard, who was driving a white Volvo, according to St. Paul KSTP TV. The victim can be seen punching Howard, then collapsing. The victim, later identified as Luis Damian Martinez Ortiz, 38, got back into his car, then drove into the medium. He was pronounced dead at the hospital with a gunshot wound to the chest, according to city officials. Howard had been out on a $11,500 bond in connection with a domestic assault case since August 6th, court records show. That's when the Minnesota Freedom Fund bailed him out. On August 29th, he was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder in connection with the Interstate shooting. The Minnesota Freedom Fund tweeted Friday admitting to its role, putting Howard back on the streets. On Tuesday, the thread was inaccessible on Twitter, but preserved by the Internet Archive. Quote, we are aware of reports of the tragic and fatal shooting in Minneapolis earlier this week, allegedly involving George Howard, an individual the Minnesota Freedom Fund had previously provided with bail support. The group worked MFF believes that every individual who has been arrested by law enforcement is innocent until proven guilty, and if a judge deems them eligible for bail, they should not have to wait in jail simply because they don't have the same income or access to resources as others. The group said it is monitoring the case and reviewing its policies. All right, so they claim they're going to review the policies, okay? But again, you know, their whole thing is misguided, right? Yes, I mean, look, just because you're eligible for bail doesn't mean that you should be in there trying to bail out people who've shown violent tendencies, okay? That's not what you should be doing, okay? I wouldn't want to have my fund or nonprofit associated with that. And Kamala Harris, who's the Vice President of the United States now, helped promote this fund and help them raise $30-some million that essentially went towards bailing out a murderer. So again, like I said at the beginning of this video, it seems to me Kamala might have blood on her hands. I'm serious about that. Because guys, imagine if this was a Republican politician or Pence or Trump, and they had bailed out somebody that's associated with some right-wing group, right? And that person went and then committed some type of crime like this, they would say, well, you funded domestic extremism, right? They tried to say that for January 6th. However, the FBI said that's not true, right? They tried to say that it was connected to that. That's what liberal media tried to say. But you see, Kamala Harris is directly connected to this, and the fact that she promoted this fund without actually vetting the fund, right? A public figure, somebody that was running for vice president, right? Promoted this fund without vetting it. And that fund turned around and released somebody from prison, got somebody out of prison that committed murder. And the liberal media is not going to say anything. You're not going to hear anything about it. She's not going to be held responsible for it. When we know if this was the other side, they would be yelling and screaming, crying, talking about what this person has blood on their hands. But when it comes to the left, when it comes to people like Kamala, crickets, you're not going to hear anything. Somebody lost their life because people like Kamala Harris and these other Hollywood celebrities who are also guilty as well went out and promoted a progressive bail fund that decided that, hey, there's no more rioters and protesters to bail out, so we're just going to bail out all criminals. We don't care what the crime is. We're just going to bail them out. If you're black, if you're Native American, if you're a person of color, if you're so-called being discriminated against, we're just going to bail you out. Did no research whatsoever. Didn't care. And this is why progressive criminal justice, in my opinion, is dangerous, right? It follows the same pattern that we're seeing across the country with these progressive DAs being put in some of these liberal cities that are soft on crime, that are not locking up violent criminals, that are letting them out on the street. These are the people that progressives say they won't run in this country. People like Kamala who support stuff like this. These progressive DAs that are just letting people out, right? Violent criminals out. So like I said, in my opinion, Kamala bears some responsibility for this. She really does. But again, you're not going to hear the liberal media hold her accountable because they don't really care, right? They don't really care. Okay? So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.